Hey everybody, welcome to the weekly SIG Docs meeting. I am Jim Angel, one of your co-chairs. Today is April 13th. It is 10:30 Pacific on Tuesday. Before getting started, looks like all familiar faces from a contributor perspective. So welcome back everybody. Good to see everyone. This week's updates and reminders for the PR Wrangler is Zach Arnold. I still need to reach out to Zach. I'm not sure if Zach is active or not. So I'll double check and take that action item right after this call. And then next week is Karen Bradshaw or KB Hockey on GitHub. As always, approvers, make sure you know your scheduled PR Wrangler shifts. The link is in the agenda doc, and I will share that to the chat now. All right. Moving on to today's agenda. Ray brought up the idea of having a retrospective for the release. I thought that was a great idea. I would love to see this for future releases moving forward. I know we have in the Docs handbook talking about more of an internal retro of what went well, but I think this is important to the wider SIG Docs community and very a valuable use of our time. So with that, I will kick it over to Ray. And I want to congratulate Ray also on a successful release. It was fantastic and very well done.
I want to thank everyone else in SIG Docs as well. So a lot of the reviews that came in very, very quickly, super helpful. I do want to make a note that having a SIG Docs only retro is actually part of the handbook. so every release cycle should be doing a retro just for SIG Docs. And so, all right, so just want to go over release 121 just went out last week, and the retrospective want to review like what went well, how can we improve the process, and how we can improve the playbook or add and remove stuff from the playbook. So just starting off with what went well, I think so 121 we moved the docs placeholder PR deadline after code freeze, and in 120 we had it, I think, before code freeze. And I think moving the docs placeholder PR deadline after code freeze was very helpful because a lot of contributors are still busy writing code. And so the first thing on their mind and their priority is just getting their code in or getting their test in to make sure that their enhancement is tracked for the release. So I think that's one of the key successes that went well. And funny, it's actually part of the handbook as well that the docs placeholder PR deadline is after code freeze, but for 120, for some reason, we had it before code freeze. So yeah, any other notes on what went well?
I do want to add, it seemed like, and this may or may not be in the handbook, but traditionally it seems like some of the plumbing that is done after release is cut for the future dev branch, for the VNext staging Netlify site, some of the, I guess, like I'll put air quotes, behind the scenes work to prep up the next release is done a little bit after the release cycle. And Ray, you reached out to me early and we got that stuff kind of hammered out either a few hours before the release, or I think it's the day before the release. I think doing that early is just helpful to get it off your plate. I feel like there's a big crescendo up to the release, and afterwards you want nothing to do with docs or the release process, and you want to enjoy your successful release after the case. So I think getting that done early was a very big success, and I wouldn't mind seeing that moving forward.
I'll take a note of that. I'll elaborate more on just on the notes. So good point. I also think what went well is that all the reviews for the docs PRs were always very quick from the SIG Docs side. I think that was awesome. It's always sort of, sometimes it can be pulling teeth to get tech reviews, so that's always going to be an issue. It's not just for a specific release. That's just always going to be because contributors are busy with with their jobs. So so just want to make a note. I know Victor's on the call, so I'm sure he's already seen that. So all right, anything else for what went well? All right, moving on, and can we improve the process? And I put in some notes here. Once is the reference documentation generation, which for this release and last release was also an issue as well. So we needed assistance from SIG Docs members to help generate those reference docs. And I know for me, it's always been kind of like, I guess there's some magic going on that I'm not aware of. I did read a comment that there are some upstream changes in that, so that I just don't know what needs to be done to generate those reference docs correctly, and if it always needs to be a SIG Docs member who has prior knowledge to generating those docs. So I think that is one thing that we can improve on. As well, I know since it's happened the past 2 releases. Any comments about that?
I do feel like this is a common pain, and I haven't personally been that closely involved. I know Tim and Karen and Ximing have both been or all of them have been very active in the reference documentation generation. I know with transitioning as well to the new format with what Philippe was doing is also a little bit of a challenge, but this has commonly been an issue, or at least from a lead's perspective. I would love to hear if there's thoughts or opinions on how to make this process easier, or at least maybe take it forward for the next release cycle. Tim?
We actually have more reference documentation coming in. It's a good problem to have, because Ximing has added reference documentation for things like kubeconfig and the exec credential JSON format that you get when you run a credential helper plugin, which is all good to document, but it means more toil at the moment. I wonder if I think we should maybe put on the next meeting's agenda. I would bump this to the next meeting and have a discussion about what we want to do about that toil. How does that sound as a discussion?
No, I agree. I think that's a good discussion to have. And there's more steps, not just Ximing's, but like Philippe has additional steps as well that I need to capture in the docs role handbook. One of the things that concerned me was knowing what looks right in the reference doc. Like, what do we expect? Does it look right? Is it ready to merge after some reviews? And that's what I kind of had, I guess, lack of clarity on like what should it look like.
So if it makes you feel like you're in good company, Ray, I put in a merge PR that got reviewed by at least one tech lead, and I made a mistake by not deleting some files that I should have deleted in the manual merge. So yeah. Toil also leaves an opportunity for us to make mistakes that we might not want.
Yeah, I agree. So, all right. Yeah, let's make this a topic. This might be a continued discussion. I'm sure there's going to be some other learning curves for 122 and maybe beyond.
Server-side apply has similar problems as Layla's put in the chat.
Yeah, it is not related to one. So this like release, but we have I got similar questions that are coming to me, how we want to document this, if you can get more help in having the best documents, the best practices, and just look into those documents and create our own documents. There are questions that are coming, and if I just joined last week to the SIG Docs, but I would be very happy if we can continue these conversations around how what are the at least best practices, so we can point people to here are the documents that have like multiple usages of in server-side apply. There are multiple users who might have different scenarios, and this is not like one simple document to address everything, but the scenarios might be different, and if, in each case they are trying to address all those cases, all the corner cases in the documents, but it's not easy to capture everything in one document, and they are And yeah, we are looking to, it is not just one PR that I come here and ask for a review in that PR, but we are looking to examples of how, what is the best way to document those kind of things. And people can easily find the relevant information, not going through a long document of like use cases or scenarios, but just point to the relevant information easily and access that information. Yeah, that is.
Cool. I would suggest, if you don't mind, let's move that to the discussion, and we can bring this back up and have a further discussion around some general best practices today, after we talk about the release piece. But yeah, I think it's a great point. I do have some questions or some comments on that area, and I'm sure other folks do as well. But let me move that to the discussion area, and we'll pick that back up in just a little bit.
Thank you. Thank you.
Awesome.
Okay, moving on for localization teams. So part of the release early on the release cycle, we create a GitHub issue just to gather who is a contact for each localization team, and we've talked about this before as well, just moving it to a GitHub discussion. So it's no longer an issue, but just have a continued discussion for any announcements as well for this for the teams to like state if there's a repo for using in the timeline as well. So I know that's a prior topic we've discussed, and so that's something that we will probably I will change in the handbook to implement for 122. Any questions on that?
Do you find benefit in reaching out to the localization leads? I know when we originally started doing this, it was more just general awareness. No one was really sure if we should or shouldn't be doing this. Ideally, some of the localization leads are plugged into SIG Docs as well. There's the monthly meeting. And I guess what I'm bringing up here is this a necessary step, and is it beneficial, and are we finding value in it?
I think the biggest necessary step is the timeline for the repo freeze, so that they're aware, and the release date as well. And I took it one more step, even though it was in the handbook. I actually pinged every localization team on Slack just to make sure that they were aware of the repo freeze and the timeline as well, even though it is on the GitHub issue, but only the owners, but there's definitely a lot of number of members for each team. So I just wanted to make sure that people were just aware of that. Right. Any questions? All right. One more, it's like a subtopic on. So we had some concern. This is from the Slack channel that Anna put in. So we had some concern with the noise of collecting primary contacts during the release, and just we don't know what we can improve on with that. But that's always a concern with every release, so just trying to find the right contact for PR reviews, mostly for docs, but on the doc side of things. But this is also an issue for other teams as well. But for docs, primarily creating those PRs and for PR reviews. And I don't have a right answer for that. So.
Yeah, I know that we this seems to be something that comes up each release cycle, and unfortunately, I don't think there's a great answer. You're going to be stuck identifying that point person one way or the other, whether it's later on in the release or early. I would love to hear folks if any other ideas or suggestions around a topic like this. It's just a challenge. It's chicken and an egg. You don't really have a data set or a list saying here's who to contact for these specific sub articles, at least today. And even if the list did exist, maybe it would be stale by the time you'd reference it.
Yep.
I guess we'll chalk it up to an unsolved mystery.
It is an unsolved mystery. I don't know what the right answer is, and I don't know. All right, I might bring that up in the retro actually that will be brought up in the release retro this Thursday, so we might have other people's input. I know for other teams, they've gone into like into a more like an opt-in approach, so that there is someone who is a contact that opts in. But Docs is, once enhancement is opt-in, Docs is pretty much you either need Docs, you don't need Docs, and there's no other opt-in. I guess there can be an opt-in, but or that I don't know. I just don't know what the right answer is, because even though with the opt-in process, sometimes it was still hard to contact the person who did opt in or the group that did opt in for the right to make a placeholder PR or for PR reviews. So
so Ray, I think you're talking about localization teams opting into being informed. Is that really the opt-in you're talking about here?
No, I think this is for just primary contacts of the doc owners or the tech reviews on for some of the doc PRs, just a contact on for the enhancement owner. This is an odd one. So this is if just contact the enhancement owner just to confirm they do or do not need docs. Because the enhancement owner has already opted in. So that's kind of an odd one.
So maybe I'm going to suggest something, and then you can tell me how far off it is from addressing the right thing, whether it's the right solution. Is it trying to answer the right question? And the suggestion is SIGs could opt into nominating a point person for Docs liaison for release.
I like that. We can make that part of the enhancements opt-in process. Just to there is a change to the enhancements opt-in process for 122. I don't know what that process is, but I have that as a discussion topic on Thursday for the retro, for the 121 retro. I like that, just having an additional docs liaison. All right, thank you for that suggestion. We'll carry that forward.
I'll tidy that comment up, Jim, in the agenda.
Okay, thank you.
Perfect. Yeah, and I was trying to break out too. I think Anna had kind of like 2 and 1. We were talking a little bit about localization. Just now we kind of diverged into talking about the enhancement owners and responsiveness there. So I tried to split it up, but if anyone's followed along in the agenda, hopefully I didn't butcher it, or if Anna's watching this on replay, hopefully I'm not missing the intent of the question, but I've broken it now into do we need to collect a primary contact for enhancement docs, the kind of chasing down the technical liaison or the docs liaison for that specific enhancement. And then I've broken the one we just talked about as far as tagging the localization owners in the GitHub groups. And that's where we notify the localization teams of some of those important dates like Ray was talking about.
All right. All right, let's continue. I have one more big topic is how can we improve the playbook, the docs role handbook? Can we add or remove stuff from the docs handbook? One thing I noticed in this release, we had more merge conflicts when we did branch sync. So during the release cycle, every week we have a dev branch, and we would sync that with the master branch. This benefits us at the end, where we don't have to deal with all the merge conflicts that might happen. This release cycle, I noticed we did have more merge conflicts, but I think a lot of them would have been solved if we just had the requirement to squash commits, and also build errors. I'm sorry, we had some more build errors, but I believe that they would have been solved by squashing commits. I know it is a SIG docs thing to prefer to squash commits, but I think I need to state that in the docs rule handbook is to ask authors to squash your commits before we merge them. And also, and maybe after n number of days, and if the author isn't responding, to just add that prowl label to squash commits. What are you guys' thoughts?
I want to clarify something again, Ray. So you're not worried about whether the squashes are happening on the master branch, the primary branch for the repo. It's on the development branch where you think
Yes.
squashing is important.
Yes. Yeah.
And do we know for a fact that squashing is the issue in the development branch and not just simply like rebasing, for example, like getting the most latest up to date?
Not 100% sure, but and changes. I think there's more build errors than merge conflicts. I'm not 100% sure, but I know that the additional commits in the pull, usually in the same pull request, you usually fixes those build errors. So that's why I believe that squashing the commits would help reduce the build errors.
Gotcha. Yeah, and I'm not too sure myself. I know that some of those build errors you can chalk up to Netlify being funky.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to figure out how squash changed. I do know, and just for historical context for folks joining us or who might not be familiar, I'm definitely somewhat of a Git novice as well. But I would say 2 years ago or so, the default strategy on the K/website repository was to squash automatically. So when you approved a PR and you LGTM/approve, Prow, the piece that actually merges that commit into the code base, would squash it, use the title of the PR, and add it to K website. And ultimately, what was happening is we couldn't create this synchronization between the development branch and the master branch without having elevated privileges on the Kubernetes website repository. So without getting too much into the weeds of this merge strategy, ultimately what happened was if we stop Prow from automatically squashing PRs, now we could empower all of the release leads to open up their own separate PR to do a synchronization between master branch or the main branch and the dev dash, whatever the current release cycle is. So it's really a matter of stopping the automation from automatically squashing and putting that PR as a single commit unit into a K website to empower now the release team to make those changes in a separate PR. The trade-off now is that anybody who creates a PR on K website, on the development branch, doesn't matter where, if it has multiple commits, those commits are all going to be merged into K/website as is. So if you have a PR with two separate commits around the same, subject area or topic, those will be merged into the main, whatever branch you're targeting as those two exact commits. So the general rule of thumb is to squash your commits. It's kind of one unit of work. It is okay to have multiple commits if you're doing multiple units of work. You could have a commit for activity A, another commit for activity B if they're separate activities. But ultimately, it's a good rule of thumb just to squash it manually. And so what we're talking about here is, since the automation is not going to squash it, it's up to the authors now to squash it. And that's a change as of, I want to say, the past year and a half or so. Tim?
There's an advantage from rebasing as well, separate to squashing versus merging. So if someone's got a branch that is a long way behind the development branch, or, they're a long way behind and they want to make some changes, whether those changes target a development branch or the primary branch, if they make those changes, then there's a long gap that Git or whatever has to automatically resolve. And Git is great at this. Git will solve all manner of differences automatically. It tries really hard. If they take that pull request and then they rebase it against the target branch, whether, so dev-1.22 or master or main when we switch, then Git hasn't got much work to do. It can, in the easiest case, it says, oh, that's a fast forward. I have nothing to do. And whether we then squash merge that or use a traditional Git merge, we are giving Git less work to do. But making less work for Git means that the author must rebase their changes themselves. It's not a thing that the GitHub web UI can do. You, the author, must know how to rebase. Not everyone does. It's, it's on the start of the Git Advanced course, I would say.
Yeah, I would completely agree with that. And I would like to see for the next release cycle, when we start running into some of these edge cases, or Victor, when some of this stuff starts coming up, it'd be great to bring up and surface the SIG docs and see, do we need to do more squashing? Do we need to do more rebasing? Like, let's bring these problems up to the weekly meeting. And then real quick here, just for folks, I'm sharing this more for my sake, but I feel like it might benefit some other folks. I'm a very visual learner. And so what I wanted to share here is a little bit of what we're talking about, not spend a ton of time here, but talking about the difference of when a feature is merged versus when a feature is rebased. And this isn't a perfect example, but what it's showing here is if I had a main or master branch here, this is this red line, and I were to create a new feature branch, call it AB over here, and I make some changes to it, when I want to merge that in, you can see here in a traditional merge sense, LGTM approved, that feature branch is then merged in to create a brand new commit on the overall main branch. A rebase is a little different in the sense of you can see that area that I've created, that new branch is now rebasing and starting to build on the fundamental commit or the most latest commit in the repository. So the difference between merging versus rebasing is pictured here. And I think this is a really cool picture to see that splitting off and then starting off here as opposed
Can
to
I
getting
chip
merged
in though, Jim?
Oh,
Because
yeah,
I'm talking about a
absolutely.
different thing. I am talking about, when I talked about authors rebasing, I am talking about them doing the thing called a rebase purely on their fork. And what they have done will still be merged eventually, but it will be kind of a merge of a fresh thing.
Mm-hmm. No, and you're spot on. And this document does not really capture. I think, Tim, you and I are on the same page. I thought this was a great visual to show rebasing starting at that commit point, but you're spot on. We're not talking about the action after the PR is there, whether it's merge versus rebase from the PR to the branch. We're talking mainly about when you've created the PR, some time has passed by, multiple changes have happened on that branch, and rebasing then starts that change on top of the latest point in time.
Unfortunately, lots of technical writers are not people who use Git in detail, and that's fine. I think it's incumbent on SIG Docs to make a strong effort to lower those barriers to entry so that people who are good tech writers, haven't put weeks into learning Git in detail, can be good tech writers.
Absolutely. And I would 100% agree with you there. And I was one of those not very familiar with Git. I'm still not a Git expert, but things like those pictures help me out, at least understand what we're talking about.
So small branch tangent, we could build a visualization and we could build some metrics around how different releases looked in terms of, how staleness, this sounds like a bad term, but how stale were people's forks when we merged in their changes? And, is that important? Does the staleness metric correspond with the sort of the pain that release leads are feeling, for example? And if it is, can we surface that to make people have informed choices about maybe nagging a rebase or whatever?
Yeah, I think that'd be great to look into. And sorry to go off on a complete tangent there, Ray. Back over to you.
No, all good points. All right. Any other questions with these more build errors? Might be squashing might be good, rebasing might be good. Any additional thoughts?
On the build errors, I think that, this website is one of the biggest documentation websites that I think is in the open source world. It's a big build for Netlify. Mm-hmm. I think we might be, and we're on the enterprise price plan, I think. So I think we might be pushing the envelope a bit of what Netlify can comfortably cope with for us. I might be wrong. It might be loads of resources and there's another issue. But, my 32-core laptop strains a bit when I build the site.
Right, good point. All right, and moving on. So one of the steps in the release cycle is to create the release branch. So 121 was released. So one of the steps was to create the release-1.20 branch to capture the 120 docs as it were. I did this right before the repo freeze on the same day. And I did this on purpose because on the handbook, it just tells you to do it during the week. But if you do it early in the week and the release is later in the week, you would have to sync this release branch. So I purposely, for two reasons. One is that you need specific rights to the repo to create the branch. these rights aren't usually given until the day before the release anyway. So that's why I made it so I made it so that when I did have the rights to create the branch, it's also on the same day that we did the repo freeze. So I just created that release branch right before. I still suggest to always confirm to make sure that the release branch is still in sync with the master branch. Same with the dev 121 or dev future branch to make sure that those are still in sync. And also what I proposed is another additional step, which I did for this one, for this release, was to do a sync also on the morning of the repo freeze, before the repo freeze as well, just to make sure that the dev branch is still in sync. So those are two additional, I guess, tasks I propose to change in the release handbook. Mostly just having a set date for it. In the release handbook, it's kind of, it just says it just says it during the release week, but I'll put reasons why of having the right permissions, and also to make sure that it's more in line with master branch. So those are kind of two subtopics off the agenda there. Any questions? All right, going on to the next one. So part of the release cycle, we also modified the config.toml files, not just for the master branch, but also on the other branches for previous versions for like 121, 120, 118, 117. We typically add in the patch versions as well, but Jim and I were talking about not doing the patch versions because after a month, those patch versions are not in line anymore. And we should do some testing to see if that actually affects anything. So with the config.toml files, because even though it's up to date at the day of release, but after the day, by the time the next patch comes, it's not updated. So they're out of line anyway. So that's one step I was thinking of adding, or at least taking into more, just to make sure that they don't break anything.
Yeah, and just to add some more clarity around this, this came up at one of our quarterly reviews and potentially something worth carrying through to our next quarterly review meeting if we don't have some additional progress on there. So there's a few links in the Kubernetes website that use a shortcode or basically a key and a value in this config.toml to generate on the fly a URL linking to a specific Kubernetes version. So I think, for example, kubectl is a good example of that, where you download the latest using or you can download a specific version using a specific version down to the patch tag itself. So there are areas in the documentation that leverage this variable that is set in the config.toml. However, as Ray pointed out, it goes very stale very quickly. And so if it's not really representing the true state of the world, it might not be worth including. And beyond that, I think that this could fall under, there's some efforts going on right now around creating a release page. Potentially whatever solution comes about to create the release page will involve the latest patch release to some extent, whether that's a data file in the repository or an API that's getting hit. Ultimately, the most latest patch will be accurate and on this release page. And potentially we could fold that into the efforts there. So I think this is a larger undertaking beyond even the release team. Happy to have other folks jump in and help out with as well. Any other questions or comments around this piece? Cool. Not hearing too much. I do think that this is a worthy effort. I just think that it might even be broader than the SIG Docs release team, and I think it might fold under that release page initiative, and might be something worth tracking under the quarterly planning if folks are willing to do so.
I guess I'll add that the sort of automation that I had in mind to deal with the toil of updating reference docs would be the same kind of automation that I would use to bump a patch version automatically. You know, it's a job for a robot if we can afford the time to make that happen.
All right. Two more. Any more questions on this? feel like we could carry that forward, definitely. All right, last two subtopics or subbullets. Part of the release cycle, we literally just copy and paste what's in the release notes to a file on K website. So what I propose is to just linking to the release notes instead. I'll have to see how that affects that page, but that's one possibility instead of doing a copy and paste. Any questions on that?
I'm a strong +1. It's one of those things I think has been done for past releases. I even did it, many moons ago. I think no one's really sat there and questioned it. But the fact that we copy it, much like the minor release or the patch version, is as soon as there's a new minor patch release of Kubernetes, those release notes are out of date. So I'm in favor of immediately removing it and replacing it with a URL to GitHub's release notes, at least for right now, or whatever the appropriate landing spot is. But I think a future state potentially is even eliminating that page and kind of consolidating under that releases page and linking out the proper assets. But we have strong +1 there. Does anyone have any opinions against, like, I guess, keeping that in the K website repository and not linking the true source?
I want release notes that look like a website long term. I'm very happy to have things tidied up now because that's better. But if we can't make sort of release notes that look like a website, I think it damages people's impression of Kubernetes just at the point they're considering trying it.
Yep, that's a fair point. There's also, I think there's the, I forget is it K8s REL notes, or there's the official release notes sub-project website that also could be part of this discussion of folding underneath into either K website or something similar to that. But once again, a little bit larger of an undertaking, but at least actionable things we can talk about today. It sounds like we're all generally in favor of not duplicating that effort, or at the very least linking to a true source.
Okay, any more questions or comments? All right, the last one is more procedural. Is one of the last steps we do in the release cycle is to create some tags for the last commit of the release branch of the current release and the initial commit of the new release. So I wanted just to update the steps because I think there is a better way to confirming what the last commit hash of the previous release is. So that's just something more procedural.
I'm for it.
All right. And okay. And I'll have a pull request for the updates for the changes to the handbook in a few days for people to review.
Awesome. Sounds good. And once again, Ray, thank you very much for your work and your effort here. And really appreciate you going through this retrospective with all of us.
All right. Thank you.
All right, moving on. Just like that, we forget about release 121, and now we're on to release 122. And so, Victor, I don't know if there's much to update at this point. Is there anything you'd like to share?
No, not really. I got pinged from the release lead today, and basically what she said was she's going to update us, but the start date, week 1 will begin on 19th of April. That's what I got so far. So once that starts, I'll follow the handbook and collaborate with enhancements and so on, and we'll take it from there, I guess. I'll keep you updated if I hear anything else.
Perfect, thank you. And moving on to the blog, Tim, do you want to take this?
Yeah, sure. We've got a few upcoming articles. We've got a bunch of release articles. Mr. Bobby Tables and I have really been reviewing these recently. I'm going to segue straight into the next point. The blog team is looking for reviewers. Now, we did have Rolf on the call earlier. So Rolf, if you're watching this on the +1 channel or otherwise, yeah, you're welcome to step forward. Everyone is welcome to step forward and look at joining the blog team more formally. We could really use, we have a backlog. People are putting forward articles that are worth publishing, and SIG Docs is not getting through the backlog of reviews to get those published.
And for folks who want to get started here, how would they do so?
I don't know. Like the blog team is so, I think, sparse that we probably need to come up with a new process as well. I know in the past there was a sort of a spreadsheet of how we do things, but I don't know if I need to keep that. I think what we need is a really mostly more people, and then we can come up with process and liaise with former contributors and so on that side. But people is what we need most.
Awesome. And Nate, I saw you had your hand up. I didn't mean to cut you off there.
No, I had the same question that you asked exactly. I'd be happy to help, and was wondering how. And so,
come and help me figure out, what we need to do.
Awesome. And I know at the very least there is the SIG Docs blog channel on Slack, and I think that that would be a good starting point. At least make a noise in that channel saying, "Hey, look, I'm here. I'm ready to help." I feel like that at least is a good P0, if you will. All right. Moving on, localizations. Yoko, do you mind giving us an update?
Hello, this is Soko. I just hope to share that Korean localization team started the first milestone for 112.1. The branch is Dev 121 K01. And thank you for the great job from the release team. And we are actually very scheduled well, since we are well informed for the master branch place and release schedule. So we are good to go. Thank you. I hope to share the this initiation. Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you very much. It sounds like things are on track there. And as always, the Korean localization is absolutely crushing it when it comes to staying on top of the releases. So I really appreciate that. And thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
All right, moving on. This is blank right now. I'll throw it out there. Any issues or PRs folks would like to talk about today? All right, hearing a whole lot of nothing, we will move on to the discussion. So we do have about 7 more minutes left in the call. Layla, I want to make sure you get the appropriate amount of time for your discussion point. So if we, for whatever reason, can't finish up what we need to finish up in the next 6 or 7 minutes here, we can definitely bring this up next week as well to go further into it. So the question that was brought up earlier and why I pulled this down to the discussion spot was talking about general documentation best practices, in particular for this one, server-side apply. And I do have thoughts and opinions on, documentation and Kubernetes website, but I'm curious to hear other folks first. I don't want to be the only one talking on this, especially with the limited amount of time. Any other thoughts, comments, best practices folks would like to share? All right. You're not hearing too much. I'll start kicking us off at least. So I do know that I'd say probably the #1 resource for contributing to Kubernetes, especially the documentation, is our own contributing docs themselves. But more specifically, there's a style guide within side of the documentation outlining acceptable and what is required from a technical writing standpoint. And this isn't so much about information architecture and organizing the discoverability of the documentation. However, it does outline very clearly do's and don'ts of good documentation. And I think, I'm not the best technical writer. I didn't have a background in technical writing when I joined SIG Docs. And this style guide has became a go-to handbook, as well as I continuously learn from it, and I try to apply it in my day-to-day writing. So I think that's a great starting point fundamentally for writing good documents. But Layla, let me check in with you and see, is this kind of what you're looking to have a discussion around, or is it something else and I'm just missing the point and rambling?
Yeah, that is definitely very, very helpful. So, yeah, we are looking into similar things that probably we can. It is more than just a simple document about feature,
Layla,
but
sorry.
a document with.
Sorry to cut you off. You're echoing a little bit. I don't know if that's just me or not.
Oh, sorry about that. So, yeah, I think that was. Is it better now, or?
It's still pretty bad. I don't know, maybe the volume or something. I think it's fixed, maybe.
How about now? Can you hear?
Perfect.
Better. Thank you. That is a perfect, those examples would help us a lot. So those are the things that we don't want to just create a blog or one feature with some documents around it, but we have the things that might and it is evolving. So maybe in future we want to add use cases, or there are some of the things that are not documented yet, but we will add to the current document. But the best thing is for us to just point us to those best practices, and that would be very helpful. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, I would highly recommend going through the contributing docs, especially the style guide that I've added in there. And then I think from that point forward, if there's any specific questions, such as how do I do something like X to create Y, or some sort of direct question, potentially folks here could help out, or maybe even on Slack if there's a more pointed question.
Thank you. Yeah, we were thinking about adding the tabs might be easier to just writing a long document. So if I have those specific questions, I will contact SIG Docs around those specific things. Thank you. Thank you.
Cool. Yeah, not a problem. Any other comments before moving on around some of the documentation best practices, or as folks have contributed to docs, things that we've learned along the way?
Oh, hi. Yeah, I'm working on some other open source documentation. I was using master. Is it now been superseded by control plane, or just control plane node?
Are you asking if it's control plane or control plane node?
Yes. Yep.
That I don't have the answer for, but I can definitely look into that. I think either or are preferred over master, but let me take a look at that unless someone else on the call knows.
I'm going to try and answer that. The control plane is the bit of Kubernetes that isn't the node, essentially, and runs the control loops and so on. Now, depending on how you're running your cluster, you might run your control plane on nodes, or you might not have things like kubelet involved in running the control plane software at all. You might run it directly via systemd. It's still the control plane no matter what. But if you're using a kubeadm to launch your cluster, then you have nodes that are control plane nodes and are tainted to not take workload pods and so on. So control plane node is a completely valid term for some clusters. Control plane is always a valid term, and no matter what tooling you use to deploy your cluster, you can always talk about control plane. And in terms of what's the thing that the kubelets register with and that you talk to when you want to use the Kubernetes API, we do not call that the master. We've moved away from that terminology.
Okay, and what is the new term?
Well, it's the control plane.
Okay.
The thing that you talk to. And before, people used the word master to mean several of those different things that I've talked about.
Right.
So it sounds like when in doubt, control plane would be a good de facto standard, unless specifically referring to a control plane node. Is that fair?
That's, yeah. And you will also find the word, master in the documentation in a couple of places where we need to clear it up. It might be talking about a replicated stateful set, which might previously been called multi-master, and we now want to use different terminology. There is a dedicated working group, WG naming, and Celeste Horgan, who is also a SIG Docs contributor, is a good person who to ask if you've got any thorny questions. I actually think that one about, is it called the control plane? I think that's a pretty straightforward one. And
Okay.
I hope that's covered in the style guide. If not, I guess we take PRs.
Okay.
Awesome. And with that, we are 1 minute over. Chris, sorry, you have a question?
I was just going to make a quick comment on that. I looked into that same issue. And when I talked to some people who set these things up, they said the difference between like a worker, like a node, and the control plane is that a worker node basically is just always a kubelet and a runtime. So basically a worker node is always kind of the same thing. Control plane can be split across a bunch of different nodes and split up in a bunch of different ways. That's why there are some implementations that will have specific master nodes that are now basically control plane nodes. But then others will have like etcd split out in separate ways. It will have other services split out in separate ways. So it's not like necessarily a one-for-one kind of thing like a node is a worker, a compute node is. If that
Cool.
makes sense.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. I think it's very along the same lines of what Tim was referring to. So context is really important there, it sounds like. Cool. All right. With that, we're a few minutes over. So being respectful of folks' time, I appreciate y'all chatting. If we want to continue this conversation, let's pick it back up next week or in Slack. And y'all have a good week. Thanks a lot. Bye.
Thank you.